Well, from my standpoint, it was an opportunity to create a company that could focus on public policy, which was my main interest, but with a component of technology, because technology, even in those days, had already become an important issue in a lot of public policy. I had experience with that in the Pentagon, where I was responsible for running big software systems to try to calculate what would happen in a nuclear war, a huge public policy issue, but something that needed the technology. It looked like this was a good opportunity to do that after we left the Pentagon, and it had become time to leave. I left earlier than the others, so I didn't follow the growth very much after we became public. It grew because we were able to solve some problems for entities. I think the majority of our revenues was from public sector entities, but also private sector entities, by using this concept that we had: analysis and design and figuring out solutions, and also understanding how to use the best technology that was available, because there was always a technological component to the solution. And we were successful at that, and we got the job done when a lot of other people didn't, and we got it done within the budgets we had proposed, and again, a lot of people didn't. To be called whiz kids was in some ways a compliment, and in many ways derisive. It was a compliment in that it implied we were very smart. It was derisive in the sense that it implied that because we were very smart, we thought we knew all the answers. We didn't know all the answers, and in fact, most people didn't understand what we did, because the main thing we did was analysis. We looked at options, we evaluated their cost, we evaluated their impact, we tried to evaluate them in a multidimensional way, looking at all the elements of what this complex problem was. And the largest, the most common thing we did was look at this for the big weapon systems and the big programs in the Defense Department on which large amounts of money were being spent: missiles and missile defense, and new tanks and new equipment and so forth. And in almost all circumstances, at that point in time, technology had become an issue. It was very early in the day, but everyone knew that you were going to have computer systems involved in your large organization. If for nothing else, the financial management aspects of things, but probably more than that as well, inventory and so forth. All that stuff was just coming into its own. So we knew that that was a major component, and we'd already had some experience with that in the Pentagon. At that time, technology had already become an important element in most organizations. And in particular, quantitative analysis had become an important matter. And to do quantitative analysis, you frequently needed computers and some help to do it. And we understood that. And in some cases, for me, for example, the work I did on calculating what would happen in nuclear wars required very, very fancy technology. The technology all developed by Hugh Everett and put in these incredibly sophisticated software programs, which allowed us to calculate things that nobody could calculate before. And the questions were immensely important. In this case, it was, can we win a nuclear war or not if it starts? So you couldn't have a bigger question, and it took that technology and that ability to do it. So we had some examples like that which were extreme. At the same time, we knew that in other cases, even when you didn't necessarily have such an extreme case of the technology being the main factor here, that without doing calculations, without gathering data, without doing data analysis, you weren't going to likely get the best answer. Hugh Everett's software was crucial. We did not know at that time, nor did he know, that he would someday be one of the most famous physicists of the world. He had abandoned physics when his dissertation was not accepted by the then most famous physicist of the world, Niels Bohr. So Hugh, like me, had been a Princeton graduate student, but he was a lot smarter. He was a physicist and mathematician. And he developed a theory of how quantum mechanics and general relativity, which had been Einstein's great discovery, could be reconciled. Einstein spent his last 30 years at Princeton also trying to make this happen, and he couldn't do it. Well, Hugh's theory was clean and crisp and mathematically very clever, but it had a very bizarre implication. It had the implication of an infinity of other universes spinning off from every action that happened. And Niels Bohr in particular couldn't tolerate it, and he was sort of gave Hugh the back of his hand. In any case, after some years, other young physicists picked up on what Hugh had written, and partially because a lot of other people had tried to solve this Einstein problem of reconciling these two elements of science and had failed. And they realized, well, at least Hugh came up with a mathematically correct way to do it. And so now, if you look at the books about science, whether it's Sean Carroll or Becker or the famous scientists themselves, Kip Thorne, Feynman, others, they all say, look, nobody's found anything wrong with what Everett said. He must have been right. And so in a recent book called What's Real by Adam Becker, for example, Hugh Everett gets more entries in the index than Albert Einstein. So this is an amazing thing that this man of this extraordinary brilliance was with us in those early days. And we all kind of wish we had known about this then. He probably does too. Now, much of it involved financial data, and the financial systems at the time were what I like to call one-dimensional because they were T accounts, traditional accounting systems, and you couldn't really look at things in the sophisticated way you needed to do proper analysis. So we understood that as well, and that was kind of the basis for the New York City project. The New York City project was definitely a defining moment, both for AMS and for me personally. I got a phone call from Steve Clifford. The city had not yet announced publicly that it was going broke. I'm going to say that 2 weeks later. He had managed to get 5 years and $20 million to redo everything, and that he had read the paper I had written in 1973 saying that things were going to crash and here's what we should do to fix it. And he said, you were right, and can you do that now? Well, look, I can't do it for $20 million in 5 years. If we could do it in 18 months for $5 million, I could do it. Okay, what's the trick there? And I said, well, the trick is no committees. You and I make all the decisions. And he said, I got that authority. We can do that. And so we were off and running. Well, when we got busy on the New York project, Fred and I got together and we realized that Hugh software was going to be essential to be able to do this in such a short period of time. And the reason was Hugh had this concept that data is multidimensional, and you should think of it as an n-dimensional Euclidean space, not punch cards with fields and records and so forth. So some of us that had a little bit of a technical background didn't have too much trouble with n-dimensional Cartesian spaces. Some of the people on our team didn't understand that too well, but it was a huge conceptual breakthrough. And when you think about it, that's the way relational databases work. And furthermore, he realized that you needed some flexibility about how you defined what the data was, what the attributes were. So he came up with what he called attribute value system. And that's really very much the way XML works, which everybody now uses. But those things didn't exist in those days. So we, in effect, had the benefits of the conceptual strength of a relational database and XML from a technology standpoint because of Hugh at a very early stage. And that allowed us to handle the extraordinary complexities of a place like New York City, where the number of attributes that you needed to record for each dollar that was spent or budgeted was really quite large, and you just couldn't do that easily with traditional data processing. So New York City quickly led to some additional work for cities. For example, the District of Columbia, they had already headed down the path of getting a big new system put in by Arthur Anderson, had noticed our success in New York and reopened the whole project and gave us a chance to do a system very similar for DC. And that was successful and continued to be used for many years to this day. The same thing happened in Santa Clara County, which was a lot of fun place to be to do software because, of course, it's Silicon Valley, right in the middle of it. And we ended up setting up an office out there and doing a lot of other work in other industries and so forth in Silicon Valley. Hugh Everett was absolutely key. I think we understood that from the beginning. That's why we gave him and his company Lambda 10% of the company ahead of time, because we really didn't have much software capability. My interest here was being involved in a public policy company with technical twists. That was not necessarily exactly the vision of my partners. I think certainly Pat and Charles, who had business school backgrounds, just thought it could be a really exciting technology-based company. But if you look at our early business plans, they tended to say public policy or policy in some sense, but it talked more about management problems and solving management problems while understanding the technology and bringing these together and helping management with technology. So that was a part of the whole thing from the beginning. Now, as time went on, software companies emerged. There weren't really software companies like ours, and some emerged focused on the federal government, some emerged focused on particular industries, some emerged focusing elsewhere. Our first focus, of course, was state and local governments because we'd had this huge success in New York. And people began to develop packages and sell packages and so forth. There were also some challenges to our underlying software. We were using Everett software, but then you had the big relational databases come into play, and other companies develop big software that worked. AMS from its beginning had as its key concept bringing together analysis, the kind of thing consulting companies traditionally did, and technology, because we didn't see very many problems that could be solved without a combination of the two. First of all, if you did the analysis and said this is what the organization ought to be doing, in most cases as time went on, there was a technological component of it. We now know that happens every day. There is no such problem that doesn't involve technology. People's private lives involve technology every day. In those days, it wasn't yet so clear. So AMS never quite made a clean decision on whether it was going to emphasize one or the other, or if it was going to try to pull them together, exactly how to pull them together. And so this dichotomy sort of led to different business sectors. Some sectors were more technology-oriented, some sectors were more industry-oriented or more oriented toward particular problems. So one of the things I treasure about my years at AMS and what we were able to achieve there is what it taught me about how to think about problems, solve problems, analyze problems. Of course, we'd had this same experience already in the Pentagon. That's why we were able to start it. But when you're in the private sector and you have to make the payroll and you have to do a lot of other things there, it's not quite the same sort of challenge. It gave me a lot of confidence. Even now, I work mostly with nonprofits and public sector on boards and things like that. And I find that knowing what I learned in my AMS days is absolutely crucial to being able to help these other organizations, even though I'm not directly involved in changing their systems or doing management consulting for them. Thank you to my partner, Fred Foreman, without whom whatever success I had at AMS wouldn't have been possible. Thank you to everybody here for coming to this reunion and for all you contributed to AMS over the years.